All right. Well, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. So, just to introduce myself, my name is Dr. Jessica Mears. I am a licensed clinical psychologist, and I'm actually board certified in behavioral sleep medicine. So, I'll tell you a little bit about what that means. Most people don't know. So, I specialize, I do research and I do clinical work, meaning that I treat people for sleep disorders. So, my whole work is based off of the science and the treatment of sleep problems. So I'm going to use that today to talk a little bit about adolescent sleep. This is a hot topic issue for good reason. So I'll start off by saying, for many of us, for many adults, the word teenager is synonymous with negative connotations like laziness, rebellion, moodiness. I'm sure you guys have heard this before at some point in your lives. I really want to pause and reframe that a little bit because there is science to back the fact that this is not entirely accurate. Our teenagers are facing a lot of really unique challenges, both socially, emotionally, and I'm going to be talking about biologically, and they're doing all of this big developmental shifting, all of these major challenges in the context of being utterly and completely exhausted day in and day out. And I want to explain to you why, because I really want you to understand the science behind this so that we can do what we can to get adolescents more sleep. So I'm going to start by describing a couple processes that are happening within the body for any of us, for all of us, to determine whether we are awake or asleep at any given time. In this first process, I'm going to be talking about what we call the sleep drive. This sleep drive is, I want you to think about it like your hunger or your appetite. So just like the longer it's been since you've last had a meal, the hungrier you're going to get. Same goes for sleep. So the longer it's been since you've last slept, the sleepier you're going to get. I think this makes sense for all of us on a very intuitive level because we all experience it every day, all day. What this looks like is if in a perfect world situation, if you are adequately slept and you are not sleep deprived, the cycle looks like this figure right here, where our sleep drive starts out low in the morning and it gradually builds on itself throughout the day. It reaches its peak right before bedtime, and then we fall asleep and we sleep off that drive for sleep. And it's pretty straightforward. But what's interesting is once we go through puberty, we have this shift in how our sleep drive works, where it actually starts to build a little bit more slowly during the day, a little bit more gradually. So once we go through puberty, we are no longer those 8-year-olds who are sleepy by 8 p.m. and can sleep all night long. We build our sleep drive more slowly, so it takes us longer to get to that peak of sleepiness at night, meaning we feel more alert in the evening hours. So that is the most simple process that I'm going to describe today. So our sleep drive is also happening within the context of our circadian rhythm. And I'm sure many of you have heard the term circadian before, but you probably don't know the intricacies of it because it's a very complicated system. I want you to think of your circadian rhythm as your roughly 24-hour biological clock. Essentially, our bodies really love to do the same thing at the same time every day. Our bodies thrive on rhythm and routine, and we kind of are our best selves when we are in a state of consistency. So we have this 24-hour rhythm that regulates sleep and wake. And so it regulates when we're alert during the day and when we feel sleepy at night. But it also does a lot of other things. It regulates our appetite. So when we feel hungry and when we best digest food. It regulates things like our body temperature. We're cooler at night and we're warmer during the day. It even regulates things like hormone release. So our hormones are released at certain times of the day versus other times of the day. So it's a very intricate system. So even down to our individual cells have circadian rhythms. So this is a process that we can't kind of get away from. It's impacting us all day, every day. So why this is important for teenagers is I'm going to be talking about one specific hormone, and this is called melatonin. And melatonin is probably a word you also have heard before, maybe as you're going through the grocery store aisle and you see the big supplement shelf. And it's one that I'm sure some of you are even taking every night to help you sleep. So I want to explain a little bit about how melatonin works because it's very important for what I'm about to describe in terms of adolescent sleep. So melatonin is a naturally occurring substance in our bodies, and it is released by a gland called the pineal gland. And it's interesting because this really regulates our timing of sleep. Basically, the circadian rhythm is driven by the light-dark cycle of the earth. So the 24-hour patterns of the earth regulate our circadian rhythm. So what happens is bright light, sunlight, enters into our eyes and sends a message to our brain that like, hey, it's time to be awake. So it sends out alerting signals and says like, don't sleep yet, it's time to be alert. And so we feel alert during the day, ideally. And the opposite is also true. So in the absence of light, our body releases a chemical called melatonin. And melatonin turns off the signaling that says, hey, be alert, be awake, and allows us to go to sleep at night. So melatonin is really, really important for the timing of sleep and wakefulness. Why this is important is for most of us adults, once we're well into adulthood, our typical melatonin rhythm looks like this. So you can see it starts to rise during the day, and it actually is virtually non-existent during the daytime, but it starts to rise in the evening time, and then it rises pretty sharply. So within a few hours of sunset, it's reaching its peak for most of us adults. So maybe around midnight or so. It's different for everyone, but it's usually in the early morning hours that it's peaking. And then it drops off pretty drastically in the early morning hours so that we can start feeling alert and awake right about the time that we're all getting up and heading to work. So 6, 8 a.m., we're all starting to feel more alert and awake and ready to take on the day. So this is actually what it looks like for kids too. This is what it looks like for adults. But what happens for adolescents is right around puberty, we start to notice this shift in the circadian rhythm. And this is driven by melatonin. It starts to build later in the evening. It reaches its peak later in the night. So rather than midnight to 3 a.m., it's reaching its peak around 6 a.m. And it's not turning off until well into the morning hours. So why this is a problem is that when we are going to school at the crack of dawn, kids are actually well within their biological night, meaning that they're starting school at a time that their body is telling them, like, strongly that it is time to be asleep. It is in the middle of their biological night. When you add to that the fact that melatonin is starting later and they're building that sleep drive more slowly, they can't fall asleep at night. Their bodies are not letting them fall asleep at the hours that they once did. And so they have a lot of difficulty falling asleep early enough to get an adequate night's sleep. And so we combine that with early morning wake-ups, we get dramatically sleep-deprived kids. 75% at least of teenagers get less than the recommended 8 to 10 hours of sleep per night. And no, adolescents do not need any less sleep than older kids. What they need is that shift in the sleep timing. So we have some really sleep-deprived kids, and I want to talk about why that's a problem. I think we all intuitively know that if we are sleep-deprived, we don't feel good. If you're woken up in the middle of the night, you feel pretty lousy. And I want to talk about what's going on in our brains when that's happening. So when we aren't getting enough sleep, when our brains are sleep deprived, our ability to pay attention, our ability to learn, regulate our emotions is impaired. because we don't have the cognitive resources to do those things, meaning that part of our brain that regulates executive functioning, which means like the ability to control your behaviors, the ability to plan, the ability to pay attention, all of these things, which already are not all the way developed in an adolescent, are really impacted by sleep deprivation. So that leads to the inability to pay attention, especially in those early morning hours. That means lower grades. And on top of that is emotional problems, because it is very difficult to control our emotions when that part of our brain is not at peak capacity. And this is really because, in addition to that, when we are sleep deprived, we experience more intense emotions. All of us do. And so the signals that our body is sending out to respond with emotions are much stronger. And then we don't have the ability to turn down and have control over those emotions. So what that means is that we get swings in emotions during the day. We get very intense emotions that we can't kind of turn down. And this leads to increased vulnerability for things like anxiety, depression, all those things that have really negative consequences for emotional well-being for many years to come. So in addition to mental health, it also impacts physical health as well. Because if you are sleep deprived, your body kind of just doesn't know how to metabolize food. And you're also more likely to be eating at times that your body thinks is in the middle of the night and is thinking this is not the best time to be metabolizing food. So this leads to problems like the obesity epidemic that we're all experiencing right now here in the US, where there's dramatic weight gain. This leads to a cascade of health problems like high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, all occurring at ages that are way too young to be experiencing these, leading to lifelong conditions. So not only is mental health impacted, but our physical health is impacted. And I'll end with this. There's a significant amount of safety concerns as well. Because if you think about a teen who has just learned how to drive, getting behind the wheel at 6, 7 a.m., they're likely to be very, very tired. And motor vehicle accidents are the second leading cause of death in adolescents. And I know that I don't want to share the road with very drowsy drivers. And think about this sleep deprivation on top of the fact that early in the morning, it's the middle of their biological night, so their body is only wanting to be sleeping. So this sets the stage for very long-term consequences and safety risks. So I'll wrap up with that. I'm happy to entertain questions later. But I hope the message of this is that we have to get our teens more sleep because it has lifelong consequences if we don't. All right, so I'll turn it over to Dr. Ellis.